Hey, Taco here. Thought I would talk to you a little bit about what trim tabs do. You've heard me, I'm sure, on a lot of my videos talking about letting my trims in or pulling my trims in or letting my trims out. So I figured I'd talk to you a little bit about what trims actually do. Oh, by the way, this shirt is for sale on the Splatware site. So if you like this one, paramotors are the only fans worth paying for. It's a little kind of a play on words. Some people call paramotors butt fans. So it is on sale on this site. So what are trim tabs for? Well, here is my glider, and this is of course a side view of it. And so in the front you have the holes because the air comes in, and that's what gives our gliders its shape, is the ram air that comes through there. And hopefully sometime soon I can find a video where you see the glider inflating as it comes up, and it actually poofs up in the middle. So what do trim tabs do though? Of course you have your A's in the front, which holds down the front. It takes most of the weight. You have your B's that go to the middle, and then of course they spread out in these cascades. Then you have your C's in the back, and then this line here is the brake line. So of course it's tied into the rest of the risers, which I have down here in black, but we can ignore the brake line for the time being because it'll move back and forth with the rear of the glider. So the glider, as you see, has this airplane wing shape. Of course, that's how it works. So we have this airplane wing shape, and plane wings fly differently based on how they are attacking the wind or how they are angled into the wind. So most of the time our gliders are set up properly for a certain speed of flight, ease of inflation, a certain speed in flight, that sort of thing. So, but what does the trim tabs do? When we talk about general aviation aircraft, trim tabs generally take some of the load off the pilot. So in other words, you're trying to fly straight and level, you trim your elevator, which the thing at the back of the airplane that makes you go up and down. So you trim that out. There's a little tiny tab on the elevator which acts as a second elevator to hold it in position. And the trim tab, so you might be climbing steadily at a certain rate and you want to set that, or you might want to fly straight and level. When I flew the helicopter, the trim tabs, if you're constantly having to push or pull on the cyclic, or maybe you have a whole lot of weight on one side but not the other, like you're flying single seat, so maybe, and you're having to constantly push left. So the trim tabs actually, in that case, were some bungee cords underneath the seat, and they would keep the stick steady. So you'd move a little hi-hat around on top of the cyclic, and it would hold it in one position so you could fly hands off. Trim tabs on our gliders do something a little bit differently. So in order to move our paramotors, we use the brake lines or tip steering, and in the most basic form we use our brake lines. And what that does is when we pull down on the brakes, it actually dips the back of the glider down, so it deforms the back end of the glider, and that way we can steer. It deforms the wing so it gives less lift on one side or causes the wing to turn. So the trim tabs affect the back of the wing sort of the same way. What they do is they allow us to move the whole back of the wing up or pull the whole back of the wing down. The neat thing about the trim tabs is, and here I kind of drew a picture of what they look like. So you have the bottom of the riser going down to the paramotor itself. Then you have an adjustable section, which is this green. It's not green on an actual glider. It's the same color as everything else. But this adjustable section, which is also sewn in, so you can't let too much trims out and then it pulls out of the lock. So you get the trim tabs right here. You can lengthen or shorten the amount of trim you have, and you can do that on either side. So if the wind's coming at you off one side and constantly trying to turn you, you can trim out a little bit left or right, depending on which way you want to go or which course you want to hold. But the neat thing about the trim, if you let them out both at the same time, what happens is, or the same length, what happens is the wing tilts up just a little bit. And I've exaggerated here, of course, but if the wing tilts up a little bit, that means there's less drag and your wing actually will go a little bit faster. And if you pull your trims all the way in, of course, you're coming back to either neutral position, or some wings will actually dip down a little bit more, so it gives you a little bit more lift. Now there's a trade-off to trim. So if you trim out, for example, if you put your trim out and you lift the back of your wing up, you go faster, but you're not generating as much lift. So in order to hold altitude or even climb, you have to give it more power. So there's a trade-off between speed and power, and speed and lift that your wing produces. So this is basically what the trim tab is all about. How fast do I want to go versus how much lift do I want? When I take off, my trims are fully in, so I can't get any more lift. My trims are fully in, and the only thing I can do is let them out, which brings the back of the wing up and lets me go a little bit faster. So I do that very rarely. Most of what I do is I only let the trim out on the right-hand side, and then that way when I take off and the paramotor wants to turn to the right, I let my right-hand side out a little bit, so the right-hand side flies a little bit easier, flies a little bit faster, so it straightens me out. The other thing I do sometimes is I let a little bit of trim out on zero wind days, because what happens when you start to pull the glider up behind you, with all this downward deflection, sometimes it's hard, and you'd have to imagine this, the whole thing tilted over on its back. Sometimes it's hard to get it past that 30-degree power band. It just wants to hang out there and not come on up over your head. So letting the trims out actually changes the power band of the wing, and so it lets it get past that 30 degrees. And once it's up maybe 45 degrees or so, then the ram air starts hitting the front, it inflates, and it acts more like a wing than a parachute. Okay, so on zero wind days, I'll let the trims out a little bit to get that glider up overhead, get it nice and inflated and poofed up, and then it's not acting like a parachute that I'm dragging behind me. So that's the nice thing about it. The only problem is when you let your trims out to take off, you don't have as high or as steep a takeoff angle. So instead of taking off like this, you take off more like this. Okay, so you're not going up as fast. So if you have a very short area to take off in, and you're used to taking off with 5-6 miles an hour into the wind, and suddenly you're taking off with nothing, if there's pine trees at the end of your runway or an obstruction of some sort, if you take off trims out, yeah, you're gonna get the glider overhead, you're gonna take off, but are you gonna clear the pine trees or the obstruction or whatever it is? So that's something you gotta worry about. So as soon as you take off and you get a nice little bit of altitude, you can pull those trims back in, so you get a lot of nice lift. But that's basically how the trims work for those of you who may not be familiar with the actual function of the glider. So I hope you learned a little bit. This is not flight instruction. I'm just explaining to the newbies some of the stuff that I've learned about how the glider actually works. So I hope you enjoyed this, and I hope you learned a little bit to help you kind of keep up with my videos. So remember, of course, whatever you do with your trims, be careful, and rule 1 is don't go splat.